Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this MDA virtual learning webinar on accessible travel. My name is Kayla White, and I'm a community education specialist at MDA. We're thrilled to have you join us today for this important and educational webinar. The webinar today is part of our larger MDA community education programs, which focus on bringing the neuromuscular disease community together around education and resources. Be sure to visit the community education section on mda.org for updates on upcoming virtual education events. We are recording today's event and will be posting it on the MDA website for on-demand viewing to ensure that those who are not able to join us live today are able to access this information in the future. Please note that all phone lines have been muted. We will have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. You can use the chat feature to type in your questions, and you don't need to wait until the end of the webinar to chat in your questions. Feel free to send those in during the webinar, and we'll address them at the end. I would like to thank today's presenters, Michael Lewis, the Director of Disability Policy for MDA, Mindy Henderson, Senior Director and Editor-in-Chief of Quest Media, and Lorraine Woodward, CEO of Becoming rentABLE. I would also like to thank our webinar supporter, Edgewise Therapeutic. We would not be able to provide community education webinars like this if not for their generous support, and we are very thankful and appreciative. For over 70 years, MDA has led the way in accelerating research, advancing care, and advocating for the support of our families. MDA's mission is to empower people living with muscular dystrophy, ALS, and related neuromuscular diseases to live longer, more independent lives. Our mission comes to life through these 4 pillars. First, care. Through our national network of MDA care centers across the U.S., we support individuals and families from day one of their journey. Second, champion. Through our advocacy and education efforts, we empower families with information and resources. Third, catalyst. Through our investments in research, we are furthering advancements in treatment discoveries. And fourth, community. Through programs like Summer Camp, our Connections program, and our community events, we are helping individuals and families build supportive connections and relationships. If you haven't done so already, we invite you to join the MDA community by registering with us. The objectives for today's webinar are to learn about your rights as a traveler and a passenger, learn about accessible rental properties, learn some tips for your own personal travel, and become more comfortable with the idea of traveling. We hope you find today's information informative and empowering. I would now like to introduce my colleague at MDA, Michael Lewis. Michael is the Director of Disability Policy at MDA, lobbying Congress and federal agencies on issues related to discrimination, employment, higher education, and recreation for Americans with muscular dystrophy, ALS, and other neuromuscular diseases. Thanks so much for being here, Michael. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. So happy to be here. There's a lot going on in the world of accessible travel, particularly air travel, which has been full of barriers for people with disabilities, specifically people who rely on wheelchairs. We are currently gearing up for a lot of legislative activities around air travel, but first I want to tell you about the Air Travel Bill of Rights, which was released by the Department of Transportation this past July around the anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. It was required by the Federal Aviation Act reauthorization back in 2018. The Bill of Rights is not expand or contract disability rights for people with disabilities. It merely clarifies what was already in statute, and it does apply to all passengers with disabilities and all flights, whether they're domestic or coming into or out of the U.S., so it does apply to foreign airlines as well. Next slide. So here is an overview of what is in the Bill of Rights. You have the right to be treated with dignity and respect. You have the right to receive information about services and aircraft capabilities and limitations. The right to receive that info in an accessible format. The right to accessible, the right to assistance at airports. So if you need assistance to get from the ticket counter to the gate and onto the plane, you have a right to that as well. The right to assistance on the aircraft, getting to your seat, getting into your seat. The right to travel with a service animal. Unfortunately, that has been a problem for people being denied the ability to board an aircraft with the service animal. The right to receive seating accommodations if you want to be on an aisle seat or at the front of the plane as opposed to a less suitable seat. The right to accessible aircraft features, control knob for the water temperature and the lavatory strength. Those have to be accessible for people with disabilities. And finally, the right to the resolution of any disability related issues that you may experience during the course of your flight. Next slide, please. There are two DOT regulations in the works that pertain to air travel. One is the final rule for accessible lavatories on single aisle aircraft, which account for the overwhelming majority of domestic flights in the U.S. Most U.S. domestic flights are single aisle aircraft, and only twin aisle aircraft are required to have handicap accessible lavatories. So that rule was open for public comment back in the spring of last year, 2022, and the MDA did submit comments on that. We are hoping that the proposed implementation timeline of 18 years to 20 years is gonna be shortened significantly, and the final rule that's gonna be released in April or May. They also will be coming out this spring with a proposed rule that would allow for fines and damaging wheelchairs, fines for injuring passengers during seat transfers. We've unfortunately heard way too many stories about people being injured during seat transfers, and then twice yearly hands-on training of baggage handlers who disengage, load, and the Power Wheelchairs. A lot of the damage to Power Wheelchairs happens when they forget to disengage the drive valve and they try to force the Power Wheelchair up the loading ramp. That's, often the point at which the wheelchair is damaged. And then the DOT and the Transportation Research Board, they have started studying the feasibility of a wheelchair spot on a plane. The technology exists. I was on Capitol Hill yesterday with a couple of other lobbyists, talking to members of the Senate Commerce Committee, about the FAA reauthorization that's in the works now. And one of the gentlemen that I was with, he did a career in the Air Force. He used to work for Boeing, retrofitting commercial jets for private use. And he said in one of the meetings yesterday, if you can put a hot tub on a plane, you can absolutely put a wheelchair on a plane. The technology exists to do it. The big obstacle of the course, the airlines don't want to give up revenue or give up seats to accommodate a wheelchair. Next slide, please. That's it. Thank you. Any questions? All right, Kayla, thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael, for sharing that information. Very, very informative. Next, I would like to introduce Mindy Henderson, the Director and Editor-in-Chief of MDA's Quest Media platform, which includes the magazine, blog, and podcast. Mindy is an accomplished author and motivational speaker and is driven to build a world that welcomes and includes everyone. Mindy is a powerful leader in disability ability rights with specific interests in accessible air travel, universal design, inclusive style, and better representation for the disabled community and entertainment. Thanks for being here, Mindy. Take it away.
Thank you so much. I have really been looking forward to this. Travel is a passion of mine, and I know that it is something that that presents a lot of unique challenges for this community. And I will start by sharing that I am also a member of the neuromuscular disease community. I live with SMA, and so I live life from a power wheelchair. And so those are some of the those are my personal circumstances that come into play when I do try to travel. So I wanted to share information and tips today based on my own personal experience. I am going to cover a little bit about hotels. I want to talk about caregivers and travel with caregivers, and then I'm going to round it out by talking a little bit about cruises. So starting out with hotels, I wanted to talk a little bit about the hotel reservation process. And I know that Lorraine in just a little while is going to cover accommodations from a rentals perspective. The majority of my experience is with hotels. And the first thing that I have personally learned over the years is that if you are going to make a reservation yourself, meaning, not using a travel agent, but if you're going to make the reservation yourself, I recommend calling the hotel directly rather than going through a hotel reservation service or website. Oftentimes with hotels and, particularly the large hotel chains and things like that, I have found that you can get the best deals, number one, from the hotels themselves. You might do some research and see what other rates you see other places, but then call the hotel directly and see if they can do better than like the best rate that you may have found online. The second thing I would say is have a list of exactly what accommodations you need. And if the reservation agent can't confirm for you whether the room will have all of those specific features that you need, many times I have taken it upon myself to call the front desk of that hotel, which is usually a different phone number, or it may be the same phone number at a different prompt. But I'll call the front desk and ask to speak to a manager, or sometimes the front desk agent is able to even do things like go up and look at the rooms for you and confirm the different features that you might need, and whether or not the rooms have them. For me, one of the things that's really important for me and my travel needs is having clearance under the bed. I need about 4 or 5 inches of space underneath the bed because I transfer into the bed using a Hoyer lift or a patient lift. And of course, those need to be able to roll under the bed. That has been really challenging over the last few years. The trend, many of you may know, is that hotels have gone to a model of these box frames that go all the way to the floor. And so sometimes I've had success talking to the hotels, and they may or may not have a handful of rooms that still have the old bed style. So that is one thing that I've gotten lucky with from time to time in hotels. The other thing that I've gotten lucky with here and there is speaking to an actual manager and asking if there's anything that their engineering department can do to help in this situation, explaining your circumstances and why this is a make or break deal potentially for you to be able to stay at their hotel. And sometimes those bed frames are bolted to the floor and there's nothing they can do. Sometimes though, the engineering department may be able to come up with a solution and raise the bed up for you. So it's definitely worth asking. Doesn't always solve the problem, but speaking to a manager and asking what the engineering department can do to help sometimes will prove successful. The other thing that I want to mention, I actually interviewed someone for the Quest podcast last year from a company called Accessible Go. And I want to give them a little plug here because they are working all the time to expand the different areas of travel that they cater to. But I think right now they're pretty specifically focused on hotels, and they've got an extensive list of accessibility criteria for hotel rooms and things. So it's much more extensive than what you see on other websites, which again, I don't recommend that you book on. I think you can do better talking to the hotel directly on rates and things. But if you do want to go with someone to help you, Accessible Go is fantastic because not only do they offer a more extensive list of accessibility features, but they also do all of the diligence, and they will contact the hotel for you. They actually make those phone calls and call the hotels on your behalf, make 100% sure that when you show up, all of the features that you've requested are in fact going to be there. So they are a great resource. The other little tip is not necessarily accessibility related, but I also just want to remind people that when you're negotiating rates with a hotel, ask them if they have corporate discounts for any companies that you may work for or be affiliated with, because sometimes they offer discounts for companies. And so that is something that I have found helpful as well. Those are my tips around hotels. I hope that that was helpful. I want to just talk about travel with caregivers for 1 second because I personally have to travel with a caregiver, and I've stepped in a few landmines along the way. And so I want to share some of what I have learned the hard way, so that hopefully, I'm sure a lot of you have figured these things out too. But in case you haven't, I would just recommend that when you're planning a trip and you're enlisting a caregiver to come with you, have very explicit conversations around what will be expected and what the terms of that trip will be. So, for example, we'll share one of my oopses. I was planning a business trip to another state. We were going to be out of state for I think it was like 4 or 5 days. So it was a decent length trip. And I didn't speak with the caregiver ahead of time about what hours she would actually be on duty with me. And she went into the trip with the assumption that she was going to be compensated for 24 hours a day for that entire 4 or 5 days that we were going to be gone. So it was a very uncomfortable conversation when I figured out that she and I had not had the same understanding, and we had both made our own assumptions about the trip. So make sure with your caregivers that you talk to them about exactly what the compensation will be and what the hours are that it'll be expected, that they'll be, quote unquote, on duty with you, and what time they'll maybe, what hours they'll be able to spend on their own time. Talk about exactly what you will be paying for and exactly what they will be paying for. Think about things like meals and entertainment and transportation and all of those things that we all have to think about when we go on trips. And just make sure that you have an understanding with your caregiver about what your responsibilities are and what their responsibilities are. Also talk about accommodation. Will they share a room with you? Will they have their own room? And things like that. So, like I said, those are some uncomfortable conversations that I have found myself in because I haven't been explicit enough leading up to trips with caregivers. Hopefully my mistakes will prove helpful to you. The last thing that I want to talk about is cruises. Now, I will say people seem to either love cruising or hate cruising. I personally love cruising. It's become one of my absolute most favorite ways to travel. I live in Austin, Texas, and there is a cruise ship port about, 4 hours away from where I live. And so particularly if you live in a state or a city that's near a cruise port, it can be such a great way to travel because you don't have to deal with flying, and you can just drive down to wherever the port is and hop on a cruise ship. And it is, in fact, almost as easy as hopping on. Cruise ships these days, I'm sure there are exceptions to the rule, and you definitely want to do your homework. But I find that cruise ships have really come a long way in terms of being accessible. I have personally traveled on Carnival and Royal Caribbean. I know that a lot of the other cruise lines have also come a long way in terms of the accessibility on board a ship. And so I will say that for cruise travel, I work with a really good travel agent, and that is worth its weight in gold. To have a good travel agent who can really advocate for you and really understand your accessibility needs and things, because they can spend the time making the phone calls to the cruise lines and things for you and checking out every little minute detail for you to make sure that your trip goes as planned. If you don't have a travel agent, again, what I would recommend is calling the cruise line directly. Again, I think that you get a lot of the best deals that way. And a little tip of the trade: don't call hotels or cruise lines over the weekend. Call them Monday through Friday, and you tend to get a little bit better quality of information and expertise. But if you do call the cruise line directly and want to book the trip yourself, make sure and speak to the accessibility services department. Whoever you talk to, the reservation agent, is going to send you a form about your wheelchair and the weight of your chair and the dimensions and all of that if you're a wheelchair user. And you definitely want to fill that out. But I also really strongly recommend that you speak to the accessibility services department and ask them all of your very granular, specific questions about the actual cabin that you'll be staying in so that they can make sure to put you in a room that's going to meet your needs. Hotels and cruise ships these days are really great about having walk-in showers, which are roll-in showers, which is amazing. One thing you want to look out for in cruise ship bathrooms, go ahead and just check out the dimensions of the bathrooms. Usually the door widths in the accessible cabins are more than fine. But do ask for, maybe ask if there is enough room in the cabin bathroom to like do a full turn in a wheelchair inside the bathroom. That's a question that I've learned to ask that can be really helpful. Getting a room with the roll-in shower, of course, gives you a little extra floor space. And also make sure and ask, for whatever reason, one other thing that cruise ships tend to do in the bathrooms is they'll have like maybe a 2-inch lip from the room to the bathroom. And so you want to make sure that you're getting an accessible room that does not have that little lip. There are lots of them that don't have it. You just want to ask the question and make sure that you don't get stuck in a room that has the lip. I would also say, gosh, there's so much to know. You could also ask the question about clearance under the beds. Cruise ships have to be so creative with space because cabins tend to be small. And so I haven't found any cruise ships yet that don't have the clearance under the bed, but it's a good thing to ask and not take for granted that that space will be there. They try to typically leave that space so that you have a place to shove your suitcases under and things like that, but definitely ask. The last thing I want to talk about is the actual ports that you'll visit. I've done all of my cruising, in fact, to the Caribbean regions. So I don't have as much knowledge about other destinations, but what I can tell you about the Caribbean destinations is that the cruise ships are so large these days that sometimes the ports are too shallow for the cruise ship to actually dock in the port. And so the cruise ship has to lay its anchor down a little bit a ways from the actual port itself. And you have to do what they call tendering, which is where you get off the cruise ship onto a teeny tiny little boat, and take that teeny tiny little boat to the actual port. I don't recommend, particularly if you're a wheelchair user, I don't recommend trying to use those tender boats. I go into cruising knowing that typically one or two of the destinations we're going to go to will be accessible, and one or two of them may not. And that's just kind of something that I accept. And spending a day on a cruise ship is not a hardship because it's a big hotel on wheels with everything you could possibly ever want. And you can get spoiled and pampered a little bit because everybody else is off the ship in the port. So if it's a port that you can't get to, don't fear. There are things for you to do, and you'll still have fun on the ship itself. So you just have to kind of have the right mindset about it. But do know that tendering is a definite issue with cruising. And again, they might try to tell you that you can give it a try, but it's not. The weather is unpredictable, and so the little ramp that you have to go down to get off the ship onto the little tiny tender boat can rock and weave. And if you're coming back from the port and a storm has hit, then really truly good luck getting back on the ship. So definitely pay attention to the tendering. One quick story I will tell you about why travel agents can be so great with cruising. We went on a cruise in December, and we were going to a port where it was sort of a weird tendering situation. But so typically, if you go to one of these ports, this particular port, and I can't remember which one it was, but typically if you go there, you can pretty much bank on the fact that you're going to have to tender to get to the port. But my travel agent was able to uncover the fact that that particular day, our ship was going to be one of the first ones or the first one in that port, which meant that we were going to be able to get like the one spot close enough and deep enough for the cruise ship to let people just get off the ship right onto the port. And so she was able to uncover that information and get the port's schedule for the day that we were going to be there, and let us know that on this particular trip, I would be able to get off the ship and not have to tender. Whereas a different week, there may have been 5 other cruise ships ahead of us, and we would have had to tender. So travel agents for cruising are wonderful. I'll also mention just the fact that there are actually very few accessible excursions when you cruise. So a lot of people who go on cruises will look for snorkeling expeditions or dolphin swimming expeditions or tours of the island and things like that. And there are unfortunately very few, at least in the Caribbean regions, very few accessible excursions. Book your excursions early, as early as possible, because any that do exist that are accessible, book up fast. And what I've found is that the most ideal situation, other people may have different opinions of this, but I always book excursions for my family through the cruise line itself, because with the cruise line itself, if something happens, if there's weather, if a car breaks down and people have trouble getting back to the ship in time for when the ship is going to depart, the cruise ship will wait if it's an excursion that was booked through them. You can book excursions other ways through other companies. It may be fine, but what I've heard is that the cruise ship won't necessarily wait if it's sort of a third party kind of excursion service and something happens. So that's just a little something to know as well. I think that those are, I will say though, and I'll end on this, any port that you can get off the ship to, even if there aren't excursions that are accessible for you, it's still fun to get off the ship and shop around the port. Sometimes, you know, there are restaurants and things that you can go to. So even if there's not an excursion that you can go spend the day doing, it's well worth it just to get off the ship, get a change of scenery, experience, you know, a little bit of the port, and maybe, you know, maybe have a meal and talk to a few locals. So I think that's what I had on my list that I wanted to share. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. So I'll pass it back to you, Kayla.
Thank you so much, Mindy. You are speaking right to me. I would live on a cruise ship if I could. They're the best. So next, my slides work. Next, I would like to introduce the founder of Becoming rentABLE, Lorraine Woodward. Lorraine is the front person for Becoming rentABLE. Oh, I think Lorraine is already screen sharing. So Lorraine, if you're ready, you can introduce yourself. Oh, Lorraine, I think you're muted.
All right, can you hear me now?
I can. Thank you, Lorraine.
All right. Well, I was saying love technology, a little technology issues today. I'm Lorraine Woodward. I'm CEO and founder of Becoming rentABLE. I'm thrilled to be here. You're going to get to see my screen notes, which you really shouldn't see, but you know, that's what it is going to be today. But you can look at the beautiful photos. I was diagnosed at the age of 2 with muscular dystrophy, and I now have 2 boys with muscular dystrophy. The idea of vacations for me growing up was really about going to medical treatments, and we really didn't vacation that much. So I wanted to change that, you know, for our family. We ended up building a short-term rental property, and it wasn't until that we built our property with an accessible short-term rental that I really understood the needs of what the importance of a short-term accessible rental. We've had over 400 families stay at our rental, and you know, it's amazing because all of the stories that they share with me are all the same, and that is what is accessible to me may not be accessible to you. And it's with that I created Becoming rentABLE. Now, currently, we're the only company globally that has looking at changing the short-term rental industry as it's been defined. Traditionally, we look at accessibility in the short-term rental industry primarily as of somebody using a wheelchair, but we've expanded what we believe is what we're looking for on accessibility to include mobility, cognitive, vision, hearing, as well as our aging, looking for an environment that's truly accessible for all of us. Historically, I don't know if many of you have gone out and looked at finding a short-term rental, but you can literally look through thousands before you might find something that meets your needs. A lot of times when we were looking for short-term rental properties, our searches really didn't include what the needs are that I had and my family had. And most importantly, it's the properties labeled as accessible, were in reality not even close to being accessible. We also found the misconception of elevators equal accessible short-term rentals, which we all know, if you're a wheelchair user, that an elevator does not mean that you are accessible. We also are looking at changing the language in the short-term rental industry. We see a lot of times the word handicapped, and so we are hoping to change that to be more inclusive and using the word accessible. What we have found that there's really an incredible lack of short-term rental properties in the United States. We also know that through our research that over 70,000 searches each month take place looking for a short-term rental property, and less than 1% of these 1.3 million short-term rental properties are actually accessible. So one of the things that I did just last night is I went on to Airbnb and looked at how many properties do they have in the United States. And they have a little over 2.2 million properties. Then I clicked on their filter for accessible. And out of those 2.2 million properties, only 677,000 were labeled as accessible. So I went and I just clicked on one of their filters, which is a step-free guest entrance, and found that there were 26 properties that would accommodate that filter. I then clicked on a second filter to get into the bedroom, and that allowed me 23 properties to look at. And then we added grab bars in the shower just for giggles and grins, and we had 11 stays. In 2023, that is unacceptable. That we have that few accessible properties, particularly with a company that has listed over 2.2 million short-term rentals. So at Becoming Rentable, we look at a number of features. And so as you're looking for a short-term rental property, we hope that this information will help you. One of the very first things we look at is the driveway. And again, I use an electric wheelchair, so I want to hit a hard surface driveway so I can get my van out and wheel out and not get stuck in gravel or dirt. We find that a keyless door lock, as you will see in this door here, is helpful versus getting keys out and getting a hold of the property manager to come and let you in. We also look at lever handles as another positive accessible feature. And we look at doors that are 32 to 36 inches as we look as our exterior accessible features. We then go into the house, and again, we're looking at 32 to 36 inch doors, always a zero threshold. And there are a number of products, even if, like Mindy said, you have that 2-inch lip, that you can get a threshold ramp for under $100 to make that a zero threshold entry. We also look at interior. What is the flooring? Again, using an electric wheelchair, I personally prefer hard surface flooring like a hardwood floor or tile, where I have a friend who uses a manual wheelchair and she will not book a place if it has carpet. Now, my wheelchair is actually known as a rug eating machine. And so I look at rugs very carefully. It doesn't matter if they're 9x10 or a throw rug. I look at that. And then I look at if there are steps, is there an elevator? Is there a platform lift? What do we need to make sure that I can get into the property, get into the kitchen, bathroom, and the bedroom. And particularly for our renters at our property that have ALS, it's really nice to have an electric lift chair. So again, when you are looking for an accessible short-term rental property, you can always ask these questions. Historically, this information has not been in the descriptions of short-term rental properties. Again, at Becoming Rentable, we're looking to change that, so we will see additional material and information on websites. In the kitchen, again, we love our roll-in kitchen sinks, a microwave that is lower. We look at a raised dishwasher, as we see here. And also we look at, again, here's the sink, the microwave, an oven, and sometimes they have it in the kitchen area, but a front loading washer and dryer is nice, particularly if it's on an elevated lift. In our bathroom, and that's the one that when we're looking at evaluating properties, the very first area that I go in, I look at is the bathroom. For me, that's really critical and important. I have limited mobility, and I need to make sure that it is indeed a roll-in shower. Again, like this one here, there is no threshold. The tile is smooth all the way across, so I look at that. I look at the wheel under sink, and even if it is more like the sink we saw in the kitchen, as long as I can get some of my knees under the sink, that's important to me. Accessible mirrors. I find that the one area in short-term rentals that is commonly misplaced. Maybe my forehead I can see in the mirror. So if I want to put on makeup, I want to make sure that I have a mirror that I can address. I personally do not use a bench, but again, for those of you that do, we recommend that to check and make sure, do they have a bench that is connected to the wall, or do they have a portable bench? Handheld showers is something else that we find very important in the bathroom, as well as grab bars behind the toilet, on the side, and in the shower. And going with doors, we look at lever handles. So those are some of the things that we look for in the bathroom. Lastly, we look at our bedroom. Again, that we look at an adjustable bed. We used to a lot of times identify a hospital bed, and but now there are so many additional beds that the adjustable bed is commonly what you might see in a description, and that equals a lot of times a hospital bed. Looking at lowering your light switches is something we recommend for short-term rental owners who are beginning to build and construct a new property. I personally am a fan of no closet doors. They always get in my way. So we look at that, and then our Hoyer lift. Does the property have a Hoyer lift in their property? One of the things that we did at Becoming Rentable when we started our company a couple of years ago is we built a model house so that this house can be looked at as what a house features are needed for cognitive, mobility, vision, hearing, and our aging. And so this is our little model house that we built in Conway, Arkansas. It was a little bungalow. We gutted it, and then I think, made it a charming little house. And everybody looks at the front and going, wait a minute, Lorraine, you have stairs in your front. We do have stairs in the front. And there was not, it's a really small lot, and we weren't able to do a wraparound. So we chose to make the main entrance the back entrance. And the back entrance was used in our photograph right here. So that's actually the back entrance, but for us is the main entrance to the property. So the front door doesn't always have to be fully accessible as long as an exterior space is accessible. We again have our hard surface driveway. We did include a ramp, and it's a graded ramp at 12 degrees that somebody could get out of their van and then go up to the house. Our driveway, hard surface. A wheelchair can go on any part of the driveway. We chose to make it a California style driveway. Never knew that that's what they were called, but I learned that when we were putting this property together. In the layout here, you will see a number of features from the wheel under stove in the kitchen. We have pull-outs on either side, so if you're cooking, you can pull that out and prep. We have our raised dishwasher here. We have roll-under kitchen table. That is important My wheelchair happens to be a lift wheelchair. Not all wheelchairs are that way. We included a wheelchair height oven. And if you're wondering, that's a toe kick. So that for me, I trash where my feet go when I'm trying to open a drawer. But with this toe kick, it gives me 8 inches to move forward to access the coffee pot or the drawers. So these are things that we look at and advocate for in accessible short-term rentals. Again, I'm a big dog person, and so service dogs, working dog are allowed in short-term rentals. And so we made sure that there was food and water underneath the dishwasher here. Here's our sink, and again, our microwave with a pull-out. Now, all short-term rental properties are going to have these features, but we felt that this was important so that people could learn from what we've done, but also to see how a short-term rental property can include a variety of needs for people with a broad range of disabilities, and it doesn't have to look sterile. And in this particular guest room, it is anything but sterile. This is a traditional hospital bed. It is more in line of children-friendly room, which I would stay in, but it has our hospital bed. As you'll see right up here, it has a light switch and also an outlet. So if you're going to be charging your phone, you have that easy access there. Again, no closet door on the closet. My favorite thing in this particular room is a little a place for children to escape, particularly if they're on the autism spectrum. I wanted, because this room was small, I didn't want people that were going into this room to be scared by the Hoyer lift. So we made it big enough so that the Hoyer lift could go into the clubhouse, the playhouse, this quiet space area. And it would be an attractive area. It would not be as scary, particularly for children. One of the things that we're doing to expand accessibility in the short-term rental industry is evaluating properties so that when you go to a VRBO, a Airbnb, a Vacasa, that when you go and search for an accessible property, that you know that what you see in the photographs as well as the narratives is what's going to be there. So we go in and we evaluate the property and confirm those features that that property has. We then provide a evaluation for the property owner and recommendations in how to move forward in getting their property certified. Our certification includes that where we validate the property, we want to make sure that the description is accurate and inclusive, so that if there are non-physical photographs, that you know in the description of what the full range of possibilities of accessibility are, and to make sure that the photographs that are on the website are inclusive of what that accessibility feature means, and then they get their certification medallion. Here's a great example of what we commonly see. Here in this photograph to the right, you'll see people commonly take photographs from the waist up, or even not just showing the floor. So we can't tell, is it a step-in shower? Is it a roll-in shower? Is it a bathtub? So we advocate for a photograph that you're going to see the top to the floor of the property. I'm going a little fast because I want to make sure we leave some time for questions. And I know I've covered a whole lot, but I wanted to share with you that on our website, we have over 1,200 accessible short-term rental properties. We're constantly looking for new properties. So if there are places that you've stayed, please share with us. It is a free service. Our goal is to expand the short-term rental industry to be a more inclusive environment and being a clearinghouse of information so that when you are looking for a short-term rental property, you have a place to go to look for those. And that is it.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. That was such wonderful information. And I loved the little yellow bungalow. That was
Thank you.
adorable. So we will do some questions here for a few minutes. And, you know, I think we've had a lot of questions come in. Marissa may have to jump in and help with the questions. But we'll do that for a few minutes, and then we'll do our closing remarks. And then if anybody's able to stay on for more questions and answers, we'll do that. So let's see. What is the best travel wheelchair to take to Europe for someone who is still ambulatory and will use for longer distances? I don't know if anybody has any insight onto that one.
I don't. I use an electric wheelchair. My boys use electric scooters. And I just came back from Seattle, Washington, and a lot of people encouraged me to get a lightweight wheelchair, but I physically can't get out. So I like my independence. So that's why I chose not to go that route.
Okay. Let's see. Is there any available help to pay for lifts? We're going to put a lift on our RV and it is very expensive. Do any of you have any information or resources on that?
I do not, but I will share with you when I went to buy my wheelchair accessible van, I asked if there were any veterans that had turned in their van, and because there's a program that every 2 years a veteran has eligibility for funds to get a new van, and I was able to save $20,000 on a van that only had 16,000 miles on it because it was turned in. So sometimes with different programs, incentives that there are, returns that somebody has taken to a durable medical supply company, and you can get it for a discount.
Okay, thank you.
What
Michael,
I might suggest,
sorry,
I'm sorry, Kayla, just really quickly, the only other thing that I might suggest is talking to a place in town that does like van conversions and things, and see if they have any resources, anyone that they can refer you to. They may be a good source of information.
Thank you, Mindy. Michael, I think I see you still on here, so I think this one might be more for you. Are there any efforts to allow people to board the plane with their power wheelchair?
Yeah. You know, the last reauthorization mandated that the Transportation Research Board conduct a study on the feasibility of a wheelchair securement system on board aircraft. That study was released in October 2021, and they said yes, it is feasible. So, one of the priorities that we have for the FAA reauthorization bill is to continue to implement the idea of a wheelchair spot on board the aircraft. You know, even if it gets into the bill, you're probably looking at least a decade or more before it's reality.
All right, thank you, Michael. And I think these two we can kind of put together for you as well. It looks like somebody has chatted in that they got on an airplane and their brand new power chair was damaged and they've been without it ever since. So people are wondering what can they do when that happens, and then
You need to call the airline. They are required by the Air Carrier Access Amendment Act to pay for the repair. Sorry, the Air Carrier Access Act to pay for any repairs. So the best bet is to call the airline and to tell them my wheelchair was damaged on the flight, and I need to file a formal complaint.
Okay, so the
And
next,
if the airline tells you, well, no, we're not required to do that, then I would call the Department of Transportation or the local disability rights group in the state. Every state has a disability protection and advocacy organization. So if you run into trouble with the airline, getting the airline to pay for the damaged wheelchair, I would call, let's say you live in North Carolina, Disability Rights North Carolina. If you Google that, whatever you say, the number and contact info to come up.
all right, thank you so much, Michael. So Mindy, we've got a couple of questions for you, and then since we've run over time, we'll go ahead and do our closing remarks. Mindy, do you have any recommendations on travel agents or agencies?
It's a good question. I personally use one called Avoya Travel. It's AVOYA. And my particular travel agent there is fantastic. But if you go to their website and maybe give them a call and let them know that you have specific accessibility needs for traveling, I would think that they could connect you with someone that is going to do a good job for you.
All right, thank you so much. We've had a lot of questions come in, and unfortunately, we just don't have enough time to get through all of those. But we certainly, I want to thank again our guests, Michael, Mindy, and Lorraine. We sincerely appreciate your time, your expertise, and everything you do for the neuromuscular community. We are excited to share that a new resource on travel is coming on March 10th. Our Access to Travel and Transportation workshop is a self-guided, on-demand workshop. Learners will become familiar with travel legislation, including their rights as an air traveler with a disability, learn how to find accessible transportation and lodging, and how to navigate barriers to travel and transportation. We also encourage you to check out Quest, MDA's Adaptive Lifestyle magazine, blog, newsletter, and podcast. There are several recent articles, personal stories, and a great podcast about travel and transportation. Visit mdaquest.org to learn more. As you heard from Michael today, legislative advocacy is very important when it comes to moving the needle forward in accessible travel. If you're interested in getting involved in our advocacy efforts, please visit mda.org/advocacy to sign up. I would like to say thank you again to our webinar supporter, Edgewise Therapeutics. We would not be able to provide community education webinars like this if not for their generous support. If you are new to MDA and are diagnosed with a neuromuscular disease under MDA's umbrella, or are a loved one of someone who is diagnosed, we encourage you to stay engaged with MDA. You can do this by visiting mda.org/join and completing a short form. Joining is free and will keep you up to date on the latest research, educational programs, and supports. We would definitely love to hear your comments about this webinar. If you have a smartphone, you can open your camera and point it at the QR code on the screen, which will pop up a web page with a short survey about today's webinar. If you don't have a smartphone, once the webinar is over, a screen will pop up with a survey as well. If anyone has questions about this webinar or any information, please feel free to email them to mdaengage@mdausa.org, and we will follow up with you. This concludes today's MDA Virtual Learning webinar on accessible travel. Again, thank you so much to Michael, Mindy, and Lorraine for all of the wonderful wealth of information and knowledge and tips that you've shared with us today. Thank you very much for attending and have a great rest of the day.